The rifles?
No, the on the shelf. Is that a meal replacement or is that ammo? The X10.
Back to the host.
Look, a lady never reveals her ammo supply, especially during times of shortage. So now these are just some people.
Oh, it's streaming.
A lot of the.
Oh, we are streaming.
We're streaming.
Yeah.
Hi.
Okay, everybody ready?
Ready.
It's always fun in the world, according to Ben Stein, who I must ask if he please turned off his phone. I want to welcome everyone to the world, according to Ben Stein. I'm Judah Friedman. Thanks for joining us. This is your first time. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel at the world, according to Ben Stein. Like us on Facebook at the world, according to Ben Stein, and follow us at Parler at Ben Stein. Tell your friends, tell your loved ones, tell your enemies. Just tell them. Joining us again is the other Ben Boychuk, managing editor of American Greatness. Great to see you, Ben.
Good to be back. Good to see all of you.
Welcome back. You were missed on your travels. And of course, welcome our resident historian and Nixon trivia king, Louis Esoteric Fine. Louis.
Good to be here.
And welcome to the podcaster extraordinaire and Parler's director of outreach, Remzo Martinez. Howdy, Remzo.
Judah, it's great to be here. Ben, great to see you. Ben Boychuk, we saw proof of life. I'm glad you're here.
And of course, we have a special guest joining us at the panel tonight. Kerry Sloan is a firearms instructor, former calendar model, and president of WeTheFemale.net. Follow her at Parler at Stilettos and Shotguns. Welcome, Kerry.
Thank you very much. And when you find that calendar I modeled in, could you let me know? That'd be great, because I never got paid for that.
That was the info I was given. So that's the info I use. And of course, the man of the hour, author, economist, Emmy Award winner, and America's humble servant, Benjamin Jeremy Stein.
God bless you, sir. God bless you all.
God bless you. And I want to welcome everybody. I think our YouTube stream is finally up, and I want to welcome everybody listening out there. And tonight's topic is something that's extremely important. And I wanted to be pithy, Ben, but I decided to go against that and I moved here, as you know, Ben, 17 years ago when I met you. And I came from Brooklyn, New York. And I remember I was at a Starbucks, and there was somebody that ordered a medium-sized coffee, and and I'm talking about the Starbucks in West Hollywood, and I said out loud, that's like sort of the bisexual of coffees. And I thought that joke was really funny. And I remember the person I was with said, "Shut up, you can't say that." And and that's when I started to realize I was in a different world where free speech wasn't free, Ben.
Right. Well, free speech hasn't been free for a long, long time. And there are all kinds of cults and factions and so forth that control the media now and tell you what you can and cannot say. And you can, if you're black, you can say certain things about blacks. If you're white, you can say anything about anyone. If you're gay, you can say certain things about gays. If you're heterosexual, you can't say anything about gays. There's a great, well, I guess if you're women, you can say things about a woman, you can say things about women. It's just a very, very, what's like uneven playing field. The whole concept of freedom of speech has gone bye-bye, especially now with incredibly powerful private interests holding huge, huge stakes in social communication and able to tell people that they can't say this or that. And the First Amendment apparently does not apply to these people because they are non-government. So we have a world in which free speech is just really a memory.
What about you, Kerry? How has free speech affected you? Because I know you've been censored.
I also was attacked for, I'm one of the classic people that my narrative twisted on social media, and I was turned into death threats and called a white supremacist and all kinds of stuff too. So because I expressed my opinion about something that was actually done tongue in cheek, and it was completely twisted out of proportion. So I agree. I don't think that it's along with many of our guaranteed rights in the Bill of Rights, people think that we are living in a free country and we're not. And it's sad that because people think that it's like some big, light switch that goes on and off to turn them on and off, but it's little chips at it every day. And that's what's been happening, obviously, with freedom of speech, but it's really happening with all of them. But the fact that the government, or politicians, I should say more, are using private industry to create censorship is just a different level of, well, lots of things, I guess, but sneaky, for lack of a better word. And
the First Amendment was passed by people, very intelligent people, whose only experience with an entity powerful enough to censor speech was with the government. Now we have entities that are more powerful than government to censor speech, and those entities are highly political, highly biased on one side, and they can control the flow of conversation very powerfully, and they can and do, and they use it. That power to shut out views that they don't believe in. Not all the time, but a very large part of the time.
Ben Boychuk, you as an editor of a very big online site, have you noticed that you've had to change, certain writers, certain things they say, certain, to not get into trouble? Have you had to even do that yourself?
No, but we notice other things that are a little bit more insidious. For example, try Googling American greatness as opposed to going on another search engine like DuckDuckGo. I do this all the time because, if I may confess something, our search engine on the site is terrible. So I have to use Google or DuckDuckGo all the time to find things on our website. But the thing is, what we've discovered in the past year or so is that when you try to Google articles on American greatness, you don't find us very easily, but you do find us other ways and on other search engines. And so there are all kinds of ways to suppress speech. And so, one thing we have tried very hard to be and remain somewhat unorthodox, but and we really don't really care whose feathers we might be ruffling. We pretty much say whatever we want, but and the message still gets out. I mean, our traffic is robust and it's growing very well, and it's growing all the time. But it is interesting to see the way that Google can certainly manipulate algorithms to make searches a lot more difficult to come up. So
hey, Carrie, you done? Can I ask you a question, because I have to get it out of my system?
Ben was about to say something. Ben Stein.
With respect, I don't think they have to use anything as complicated as algorithms. I mean, they just know certain people are politically infected, and certain people do not know to be on their incredibly important, wealthy websites, and they just keep those people off.
What about you, Remzo?
That's not.
I saw this right after college. I was a freelance reporter for a little bit. And if you want to go ahead and get up in the media, the first thing you don't do is let people know that you're right of Chairman Mao. But the other thing you don't do is immediately start going after the tech giants. I wrote a story in January of 2019. Trying to forget the gentleman's name. He was the director of policy for Google. And around this time, it was when the CEO of Google was brought in before Congress to talk about Project Dragonfly. It was essentially a giant contract with the Chinese government to create their own version of the internet, which would track the IP address of people. And as I went ahead and just asked him questions about this, he said, I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, that's just fake news. And I mentioned that, well, it's hard for this to be fake news. What's mentioned.
Hold on a second. We're having some terrible feedback from somebody.
Yeah, I don't think it's me. I'm not doing anything. But I hear it sounds like somebody's running a water faucet.
Yeah. Okay, but keep going. Everybody. Yeah. Sorry.
For the record, Boychuk had Indian food.
For the record, Ben Boychuk mutes his microphone when he's not talking.
Yeah. So Remzo, go ahead.
Censorship is bad.
We're not even censoring people's muffled sounds coming from them tonight. And we're going to do a quick reset. If you just tuned in, you are listening to The World According to Ben Stein. We've had some technical difficulties tonight, but Ben Boychuk, why don't you tell everybody where they could find us?
Please subscribe to us on YouTube at The World According to Ben Stein. Like us on Facebook at The World According to Ben Stein. And follow us on Parler at, and this is the easy one, Ben Stein.
And I want to welcome everybody back to The World According to Ben Stein. We have a special guest tonight, Carrie Sloan, and we are talking about free speech. Ben wrote an amazing piece yesterday on Parler about, you know, I believe you used Madison and Lincoln, or couldn't have imagined in their wildest dreams.
To think that
Jefferson.
Jefferson.
They were going to go from Washington, Jefferson, Madison, Adams. Bueller to Biden. It's astonishing. It's really like falling off a cliff.
Yeah.
What about you, Lewis? You've been a little silent. Let's get to you.
Well, I think that, and I was thinking about this earlier today, that either by design or default, sites like Facebook and Twitter are utilities. They operate like utilities, but they refuse to acknowledge, in their own defense, for their own defense, that they are utilities. And the distinction is very important, because if Con Edison has no right to target someone's house and turn off the power because they know that the people living in that house are right-wing extremists or left-wing extremists. They can only turn off the power if you don't pay the bill. Now, you may say, wait a second, Twitter and Facebook are free. You're not paying anything. You're paying far more than you would pay for electricity because you are furnishing your data. And someone, in this case, Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, or Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook, you're talking about people who are not the most learned individuals on civic affairs, on First Amendment law, no matter how many lawyers advise them. Their knowledge of our founding documents and the principles by which we come together as a society are foreign to them, to the extent that they even know anything about them. And the other problem here is one of cost. So long as they are not officially designated as utilities, so long as the Telecommunications Act of 1996 is in place and exempts them from any type of liability for libel, because they are not publishers, they will not invest in people, not algorithms, not AI, not software, but people. They will not invest in people who will look to see if something is, based on the guidelines according to the Constitution, if something is, say, scandalous or libelous or, excuse me, scandalous, that doesn't matter, but if something's libelous or whatnot, they summarily pick and choose based on something they don't like. That's not the criteria. And you have someone like Jack Dorsey, who's dressed, with all due respect, Judah, like you, because I think you're doing your Jack Dorsey impersonation right now. You have people in hoods, in colored hoodies, that are the adjudicators.
Okay, why don't you let Ben Stein respond to that? Ben, go ahead.
Not so free speech.
I don't get what do you mean, people with hoods? I don't get
hoodies.
The way
they dress.
People dress. You know how you used to bust my chops about the way people dress? They don't wear suits anymore. They now wear, like, you know, t-shirts and hoodies, who are running these
It's frightening that anyone who's stupid enough as a grown-up to wear a hoodie, no offense intended to those who do, would be making free speech judgments. And that's kind of terrifying. But the whole thing is terrifying. And I must say, we have gone so far from freedom of speech that we're going to have to go a long, long way to get it back. And the Democrats are not going to want to get it back, because we essentially now have a Democratic Ministry of Information, Ministry of Truth, which it was in 1984, the great novel 1984. We now have Mini-True, and that is totally controlled by the left wing. So we now have total, not total, but almost total media control by the left wing. Why would they give it up? It guarantees them incredible importance. They lost the election of 2016 in all parts of the government, and yet they maintain their grip on power because they have control of the media, and they have control of the media largely through their iron control of social media. That is terrifying, and I don't see what is out there to stop it. I mean,
so let me ask you a question, Ben, because I was always a little confused by this, because the publicly traded companies, I always thought were held to higher standards, which obviously they're not.
No, they're not at all. They're held to higher standards. They're supposed to be held to higher standards in terms of their responsibility to their investors. They're supposed to put their responsibility to their stockholders ahead of the responsibility to the officers and directors. That is supposed to be an iron law. It is much more honored in the breach than in the observance. And that has made a number of people very, very rich by looting the companies. But there's nothing, absolutely nothing in securities law that says that the people running corporations have to allow many different points of view. There's nothing in any kind of law that I'm aware of about fiduciary duty that requires that. And that's a really serious problem. And I don't know how we retrieve that. I mean, it's just suddenly the media, the online media just got to be so big, so fast. The law hasn't even come close to catching up with it. And as I say, as long as the Democrats are in control of either making or vetoing legislation, there's not going to be any legislation about this. And the control by the left is just going to have to be bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. It's going to be a scary situation. I mean,
yes, Ben Boychuk.
Sorry, I beg your pardon for running on.
No. So let me propose this to you, which is a somewhat radical idea, possibly. We had a piece that we published at American Greatness on, I guess it was either Wednesday or maybe it was Tuesday. So possibly today, which suggested that in the absence of congressional action, and this again somewhat assumes that the election goes Trump's way. In the absence of congressional action, and given the extensive powers that the president wields, whether those are maybe beyond Article 2 authority or not, just nationalize the things.
Nationalize the internet?
Nationalize social media companies.
Oh, but the people who run it are going to be the same deep state bureaucrats.
Not well, yes. I mean, so that also presumes that is correct, and so therefore it also requires
even more frightening, because at some point there might be terribly wealthy people, and there are lots of terribly wealthy people who could make a run at buying enough of an interest in one of these big social media companies to influence them to let more people onto their sites. But if it's run by the government, nobody has the kind of financial power of the federal government has. Nobody can control that. And if the Supreme Court is packed by whoever becomes president, and which could happen, don't want it to happen, but it could happen, then there's just nobody to stop them. There's nobody to stop them.
We're up creek with no paddle. So I know Kerry wanted to say something.
Right.
Well, I ran this by. I did a live stream last night on Instagram just to kind of run this by and think out. Let me just be real about this, because I've studied the Constitution my whole life. My husband's a historian, published historian, so we're just geeks about this. But I didn't want to look like an idiot in front of Ben Stein having conversations about the Constitution. So I did some homework and I ran this by a few people. And there was this big thing about net neutrality. Remember that a few years ago, and there was a lot of conversation about that and nationalizing the internet in itself. And I agree with Mr. Ben Stein over there that there is nothing more dangerous than allowing the government to just have full reign to be able to control what the people can see and not see. And then you get into like some, I think it was Bo maybe said something about the economic piece, right? Because now then you're going to have the people paying, right? The people that can afford it are going to pay for the other people to not. And then guess what that means? Now you're going to have those people, just like with everything else in that welfare mentality system, right? Who do they keep in power in their municipalities? They keep those people that are handing them the free stuff, right? So you're just going to continue to perpetuate that extremism piece of that. And they're going to, I think that that's an incredibly dangerous proposition. And obviously, I mean, back to like Mr. Stein had written about with the founding fathers. They knew it, right? And they knew. I mean, Franklin really knew the power of the media at the time, and understood why it was so important to make sure the economic power of it.
Nobody had any idea of how powerful social media would become on the internet.
Oh, no.
Nobody even knew what social media was.
No,
it was Paul Revere on a horse.
Well, I have a good analogy I use for that when I do a lot of gun rights advocacy, and I tell people all the time, this is one of those things where I get a lot of people, and if if you're a gun owner, you've probably heard this. Well, the Second Amendment didn't apply to semi-automatic rifles or weapons of war. Well, actually, it did, in fact, apply to weapons of war. That was the purpose of it. But for me, I tell people all the time, like, look, you can't give me that argument on the internet. You can write that crap on parchment paper, roll it up, seal it with wax, and dispatch your messenger to me by horse, and then we can have that conversation. And so I think that they wrote, it was written in context for what they had, but I think the way that the language is written, it still is very valuable and applies in today's society. I think, and if I'm understanding Ben correctly, when he wrote this, it's the concept, it's not as much the concept of the technology or the evolution of how we communicate through media or free speech as it is that how the politicians have been able to manipulate censorship through the private industry, and so that the private industry can sit back and say plausible, like they can sit back and say, hey, we're private, we can do whatever we want, which is protected under the First Amendment. But then, but their puppet strings are being pulled from the back, and it's kind of this loophole situation where nobody could have thought of that. And I think that, am I correct, Ben Stein? Is that kind of it's not so much the platform. I mean, nobody could think of social media, of course, but the fact that it could be controlled by politicians through private industry, is that kind of?
I don't think anyone thought that the media itself could be controlled by a very small number of people who wield power and are unaccountable to anyone.
Right.
Even government is accountable to the voters, but these big giant companies that do social media are not accountable to anyone in terms of the content of what they put on their sites or who they keep off their sites. They're not accountable to anyone. I mean, you and I think Lewis is a lawyer. We couldn't go into court and sue about this. There'd be no cause of action.
We know one lawyer, but I think Ben Boychuk wanted to come back in and say something on the subject.
It isn't that I would dissent slightly from Kerry just a little bit. It's not the politicians made the law. The law that we're disputing in part is the Communications Decency Act of 1996. So we talk about Section 230 of that. But my take on that is a little bit different. That when I was in college 30 years ago, there was a Marxist critique of corporate control of media, which was that there was a very small number of corporations that controlled a vast quantity of media outlets. Certain companies owned many newspapers, many public publishers, book publishers, television companies, so on and so forth. And the argument there was that this concentration of these media outlets among a very small number of corporations favored conservatism because it favored a certain corporate, a status quo that favored the bottom line. And what has happened over the past 20 years, 15 years, especially with the ascent of Facebook and Twitter and others, is that the dynamic has switched. So that essentially people who read those books 30 years ago in college at Harvard are now running multi-billion-dollar corporations and imposing those ideas that go back as far as a guy called Herbert Marcuse, who wrote a famous essay called repressive tolerance, which essentially said no tolerance for right-wing ideas, tolerance for left-wing ideas. And so that's kind of where we are. So you know what we're seeing? Yes, Ben.
He was a big hero when I was in school.
Yes, yes, he was, wasn't he?
Ben, you
His
have to speak
protege,
up. Ben Stein, you have to speak up a little bit.
He was a big hero. Marcuse was a big hero when I was in school.
Yes, he was, and his protege may have you may have walked past her in the hallway at UC Santa Cruz.
Angela Davis.
Correct.
Did you know Angela Davis, by the way?
I'm sorry, who was that?
Angela Davis. Did you meet Angela Davis at Santa Cruz?
I never did. She came there after I left. God bless her. I was never a student there. I was a teacher there.
Right.
After I left.
And on that note, I actually, after when we come back, I want to get to Remzo because there's the very interesting thing with him being at Parler. But if you just tuned in, we've had a few technical difficulties tonight, but we seem to be trudging through the road of happy destiny here. And if you just tuned in, you are listening to The World According to Ben Stein. Ben Boychuk, can you tell people where they could find us?
Well, certainly, please, in all likelihood, you're watching this as we're streaming live on YouTube. Take half a second to click that subscribe button and please subscribe to the channel, because if you've missed episodes, you can go back and you can watch them, and they're all very, very good. You can also like us on Facebook at The World According to Ben Stein. And of course, you should be on Parler and follow us on Parler, the easiest of all, at Ben Stein.
And thank you for that. Welcome back to The World According to Ben Stein. You know, Ben, when I first brought this topic of with Trump and free speech, I immediately remember everybody was going on the assumption, oh, that means that everything that's going to come out of people's mouth is racist. It was the biggest mass projection of what people were, you know, who obviously have racist thoughts, thought that that's what would come out of their mouth. When we think about free speech, Ben, we think about being able to drive in a car and be able to have a conversation and not worry about the thought police. And Remzo, when people think of Parler, they think it's like, you know, oh, it's the, you know, the conservative Twitter, or it's like, you know, for Klansmen. It's just for people that want to be able to share open and honestly, Remzo.
We know that. We all know that.
No, but I'm saying but Remzo, I'm saying the importance of what Parler is and what people are trying to peg Parler into. It's
projection.
Yes.
I mean, if I wanted to go on Twitter right now, I could find 10 white nationalists. And I think it's so funny. You know, often I'll be speaking with people and they'll say, well, isn't it, you know, a place for all these racists and they hate minorities and stuff? And I'm like, look who you're talking to. The caller ID says Remso Martinez, so you might want to double check that. But there's one book I want to recommend, and it's Man, Economy, and State by Murray Rothbard. I'm not going to go into it, but that's the one book. If I have to make a book recommendation, it's Man, Economy, and State by Murray Rothbard. Lewis is a great American and a smart man. I take disagreement with something you said earlier. Facebook and Google and Twitter, they're not public utilities. Often we get so fixated with the carrot that's being dangled at us. Go ahead and change everything you want through the force of the state, the biggest monopoly of violence in the world. And we often think that our votes are the most important thing ever. But really, when you think about it, your vote really doesn't change much. The politicians might come and go, but the ambitions stay the same. There are two things that you can do to make actual change in this world, and it has been proven through every empire, every nation, and through all of history: your time and your money. We have a free market. It's not the best market, but it's the best market in the world that I can see. And if people actually wanted to make the change, they could go ahead and do it. You don't have to be on Facebook. Everyone thought 10 years ago that MySpace would have the monopoly, and last I checked, we're all wishing we lived in the days of MySpace Tom. And Parler came about in 2018 as a direct solution to what's going on. We respect free speech. We respect data privacy. We treat you like actual people and not digital property. And ultimately, it's funny because whether Trump wins or loses, assume that, you know, Section 230 gets changed and you go ahead and start labeling whoever you want to be publishers. I believe that Facebook and Twitter have definitely squandered this moment to actually make some good changes. They have definitely shown that they are editorials. But at the same time, I also want to bring up the example of the Patriot Act. Republicans loved the Patriot Act when George W. Bush was president, but suddenly we have Barack Hussein Obama, and the Patriot Act is bad because the Patriot Act can be used against you. And suddenly everyone is clutching at their pearls, wondering, why is this happening? Each time you give something to the government, you're giving them the equivalent of a loaded gun. And if you wouldn't feel comfortable with your worst enemy pointing that gun at you, it probably shouldn't exist in the first place. So the ultimate power lies in your hands. Use your market forces, divest your time and your money from the places you don't like, and it'll be amazing what you see as a result.
Greatest respect, those are brilliantly taken points. But the companies that we're talking about here, the giant social media companies and tech companies, are so big that no amount of divesting by private citizens is going to make any difference. These are gigantic entities owned by enormous funds, university endowments, hospital endowments, church endowments, very, very, very wealthy people endowments. It's too big to change them by divesting. It's too late to change them by divesting. There's going to have to be law that is going to, in some way, restrict them from restricting other people. But it's not going to happen, because if that happens, then the Democrats will say, "Oh, that's racist. You're doing that so that you can allow racist thoughts on your platform." Racist, but it's too late. I don't know how you stop it. You just can't. I can't easily think of a way, or even in a difficult way, think of a way to stop it. We are now in a real serious problem in terms of free speech. A very, very serious problem.
Carrie, I saw you wanted to jump in.
Well, on that note, and I agree. I completely agree. I think we have a serious problem. And I think that as much as we're looking at the politicians controlling the media and that narrative, I think that at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, who are the people that are responsible for continuing to perpetuate that? And that's us, right? So, I mean, even the people that hate these platforms or complain about these platforms are always frustrated with all the stuff. They still continue to use these platforms. And so,
with great respect, we are so few. We are so few of
right.
us. I mean, I'm a big advocate of the free enterprise system. Huge advocate of free.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Me too. Yeah.
And great advocate of it. And the people, I give a lot of speeches to people who are corporations and executives of corporations, directors of corporations, large stockholders of corporations. They are great people, and they believe in the free enterprise system. How many of them will actually fight and put their money on the line to fight against these monopolies? I don't see that many of them. God bless them, but I don't see that many of them. People don't want to rock the boat, and the boat now is a big, huge, enormous boat called status quo in the media companies. Maybe some new technical innovation will come along so that people can communicate just by blinking their eyes. But at present, we are stuck with these gigantic companies that are just too big to move.
Lewis, I know you wanted to jump in.
So I want to speak to an earlier point. I did not say that Twitter or Facebook is a public utility. I said that either through design or default, more default, they have taken on the role as acting as utilities. There are power companies, many power companies, that while publicly traded are still quote unquote private corporations that provide electricity or gas to cities and municipalities. There is also no free market in social media. I can't think of any place where there is a free market. There are varying degrees of freedom, but at best it is an oligopoly with Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Facebook owns Instagram, and you have WhatsApp.
It's frightening.
Snapchat.
It's frightening.
But the bigger problem is this: Twitter and Facebook, but Twitter especially, can be and often is a source of news, breaking news. And if you are a member or a resident in a community for which, say, 80 or 90% or a disproportionate amount of people use Twitter for news, and you have no other way of reaching them, and you scream silently, you type it, but you mean to scream with as many exclamation points as possible, fire. That's because there is a fire. If you're banned from Twitter because of your politics. And bear in mind, it's easier for the New York Post to get banned, to have a story banned from Twitter, than it is for ISIS to operate publicly and recruit people through social media than it is for the New York Post to publish or circulate or share a story it ran that day about allegations concerning Hunter Biden. Well, when you get into that kind of minutia where you pick and choose which stories are acceptable based on a criteria that is entirely arbitrary, maybe sometimes liberal, sometimes middle of the road, sometimes not, you can't conform your politics to Jack Dorsey's or Mark Zuckerberg's on top of the terms of service that are supposed to govern these sites. And finally, on an unrelated point, Kerry, who framed Roger Rabbit?
And on that note,
hey, I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way.
I by the way, I want to get to Ben Boychuk quickly, but Stein, I think the point that Remzo is sort of trying to, I don't want to speak for Remzo, was he was saying,
I'm kidding.
And I know this isn't, nobody could speak for Remzo. And I know this, Ben, you're right, because it's so massive at this point, the scale of what social media is, that you're saying it's like, so what if 50 million of us turn off Facebook? They still have another 400, 50, 80, 800 million. That's how big they've gotten, that if it's not like if 2 million were to turn off a certain late night show, that late night show would no longer be on. If 40 million people left Facebook, it would be but a blip.
But Judah, here's the thing. Google, which is now the subject of an antitrust suit, Google, with all its money, tried to compete with Facebook. They launched Google Plus. They closed it. And I'm curious to know what Professor Stein has to say about this, because you're a former professor, Judge Bork, concerning monopoly. For all intents and purposes, didn't believe in it if the consumer was getting something at a good price. In this respect, I wonder if he would say, well, it doesn't cost the consumer anything, so what's the harm done? And I would say, in turn, it costs the consumer a great deal, because the harm that's done is the violation of their data. And if they can't get news or share news because everyone is on a site, one or two sites, there is a harm. They're banned from even joining it because of their politics. What do you think?
Exactly. I think that's exactly right. I must say we've reached a rather depressing stage here, because what we're talking about is a problem which is a serious problem and perhaps an incurable problem. When Mr. Nixon, my former boss, and a wonderful, wonderful man, a great, great, great man, was forced out of office, he was not forced out by the Democrat Party. He was forced out by the media. It was, as my sainted mother so aptly said, a media coup. It was not done by the Democrat Party. It was done by the media, who just, what shall I say, blackened his name horrifyingly in the pretext of being bipartisan or nonpartisan or so. They were, that was the media doing it. And they've done it to Mr. Trump. They've done the exact damn thing to Mr. Trump this time around too. And it's really, I don't know, it's scandalous. They decide what's scandalous, and we don't get to decide. We just stew in our own juice. They're running things. It's too late. It's too late.
Ben Boychuk, I know you wanted to add something before we reset.
Yeah, it may be too late, but I'm not sure. I don't know, but to an earlier point, I would desperately like to get off of Facebook. Very much like to get off of Facebook, because
Hold on a second. Somebody needs to mute their mic. I think it might be Kerry. If you
might be, I'm not sure.
I'm not sure who it is. Go ahead, Lewis. Go ahead,
right,
Ben.
Cool. I would love to get off of Facebook, because for all of the reasons we've discussed. I don't do politics on Facebook anymore. I haven't done politics on Facebook since 2017, but I have plenty good reasons to stay out of Facebook because of something that Lewis said, which was, I live in a mountain community of Southern California, where there's really good information on Facebook about local weather, local traffic, things that only locals would know, and information that I could only get from locals on Facebook. Otherwise, I would be off of this thing in a hot second. And so that creates a problem, because
it's just an even worse problem, I was saying.
Yeah, that's right. Because they continue to get my data. Now, there's a very good book. I don't like everything the guy says, but there's a very good book by a guy named Jaron Lanier called 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but there's one aspect of the conclusion that he draws in the book, which is, the way the business model is set up, it's set up for anybody to, we're basically selling our attention. They're trying to buy our attention, or we're selling our attention. Whereas if we had to pay for it, if we had to pay for Facebook, or we used to pay for CompuServe back in 1990,
What's
or
that?
AOL back
Or
in,
AOL.
or AOL back in.
You couldn't just go with AOL.
I had CompuServe too.
You lost me right there.
No, but listen,
age test right there. God, I feel old.
Hey, Remzo, I mean, tell your bosses. I would pay a little bit to be on Parler every month, because the difference, if I'm paying for it, I'm getting something from it. Whether I use it or not is another question, but I'm paying for something. Whereas now, it's about, I understand a little bit about the business of it, but I don't know that, at least in the case of Facebook and Twitter and Google and even Amazon, and I've got a lot of great stuff from Amazon, but even Amazon doesn't know me that well after 25 years. I don't, if I'm paying for a service, that's one thing. But if I'm giving it all away, I deserve something more in return. And so all of a sudden I find myself, self-censoring on Facebook, where I've been on for more than 10 years. I would love to be able to say what I think wherever I want without fear of sanction. Instead, I post stories about freaks in Florida and cat memes because it's safer that way. But I stay on there because I have professional reasons to stay on there.
That's the problem.
Right. That's the problem.
It's like to advertise, you need to go to Facebook. You can't just use it as it's this quagmire that Ben Stein was bringing up before, that they've gotten so big that I don't know what the answer is. And I'll be honest with you guys, my biggest fear isn't this election. I really do believe the left's goal is that we make a president of the world. And I'm very scared that future president of the world, and I'm not trying to say this as a conspiracy theorist, is Barack Hussein Obama.
I don't know about that, but look, I don't know about that, but I do know this.
It might be Lewis, and we don't know.
Oh, that would be great. But no, but here, think about this, Judah. Think about this. If the thing is, Trump got elected in 2016, in part because people voted against the extremism of political correctness. It's actually gotten worse. And it's gotten worse because essentially the oligarchs have insisted that they would impose their view of the world. And so you get banned anyway, you get deplatformed anyway, you get demonetized anyway. So it remains to be seen, regardless of how the election goes, if Trump gets reelected or not. The screws may continue to be ratcheted down anyway. And maybe, Remzo, Parler is going to be the safe harbor. because I am ready to ditch. I will ditch Twitter in a blink of an eye.
Everybody would.
Yeah.
And on that note, if you just tuned in, you are listening to the World According to Ben Stein. We're talking about the most important thing in the world. And I know, Kerry, without the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, but for me, the First Amendment is so important. And I know you need the Second Amendment to fight for the First Amendment. I get all of them. But if you just tuned in, Ben Boychuk, why don't you tell people where they could find us?
Well, for goodness sake, please subscribe to us on our YouTube channel at The World According to Ben Stein. Like us on Facebook at The World According to Ben Stein. And follow us and tell your friends and family and enemies and anybody else, and people you encounter in coffee shops, to follow us on Parler, which is the place to be, at Ben Stein.
I want to welcome everybody back to the World According to Ben Stein. We're talking about something that's so important to us tonight, to everybody, that should be so important. And what Ben Boychuk, Ben Stein, just brought up to me is frightening, because he's right. The point in electing Trump was to stop this thing on free speech, and it's only gotten worse. And it's sort of a frightening experience. And I want to go to you, then I want to go to Lewis for a second. But Ben, I mean, have you ever seen it as bad as it is right now?
Are you asking me or the other?
No, I'm asking you, Mr. Stein.
As bad as it is now, it's terrifying that although it was close to this bad in the Nixon years, and it was extremely, extremely, extremely bad. Now the race has become the fulcrum, which is going to move the world, and it's suddenly been discovered that we're all racists and Klansmen. And unless we make full confession and get on our knees and flagellate ourselves and so forth, then we're going to be branded as Klansmen and Klanswomen, I guess, forever. And we're not allowed to say a word unless it's politically approved by the commissars as not being racist. And that, to me, is a terrifying situation. Nobody in this country ever tells the truth about racism in this country, which is that racism in this country was almost entirely a creature of the Democratic Party for a very, very long time. It was Republicans who threw off the shackles of the African Americans. It was not the Democrats, it was Republicans. Nobody ever says that. And so we've gotten to a situation where the whole basis of all these complaints about racism, and racism is a terrible thing, has gotten totally turned upside down. And that's because of the incredible power of the media. It's very, very scary. The media is propagating a huge super lie.
And the reason I wanted to go to Lewis is because Lewis sends out these, Kerry, you're not on them yet, but you probably will be. Never share your number with Lewis. Lewis decides often enough to send out text strands on a daily basis to about 5 or 6 of us, where they're the most off-color, nothing about, when I say off-color, I don't mean race. And they're just 4 or 5 people just joking around in a sort of mini tweet, in a mini text chat.
Sounds like my kind of party.
No, it is. It's a lot of fun. He's involved Ben Stein via email, and but Lewis and Remzo's part of it too, and Remzo sees it, and Lewis, it's like what. This is Lewis's free speech, which is the furthest thing from anything racist, homophobic, or anything. And this is what they're trying to stifle you, Lewis.
Well, there are differing degrees of speech, and I think the people who want to and are policing our speech know nothing about the nuances, and nuances are important with regard to speech. There's a matter of, on the one hand, civility. You don't go to someone's house and say you want to F their wife. I might say it at Kerry's, but that's a separate story. 2, something that is constitutional is separate from something that is civil. The point of free speech is not to simply engage in popular speech, but to have a right and the protections to exercise and speak to those things that are unpopular, offensive, sometimes, oftentimes inflammatory, and equally based on ignorance. I support the constitutional right of Holocaust deniers to say the Holocaust never happened. I do not find their position morally defensible, I will not engage them in conversation because I have a right not to engage. There are rights of commission and omission. I will not engage so-called 9/11 truthers in debate. They can say what they want. They have a right to say what they want, and I will defend it consistently without exception. They should not be penalized criminally. They should not be fined, and they should not necessarily be punished socially in terms of losing employment if they're doing the job they were hired to do. Their politics are irrelevant so long as they are doing what they are supposed to do. Their beliefs do not necessarily merit a response. If they want to advertise them, a publisher has the right to decline. But no one has a constitutional right to say within the public square, you may not march, you may not picket, you may not distribute your leaflets, provided you have secured a permit, provided security is in place if there is a risk to the public and public property. But we will not and we cannot punish you simply because your speech is unpopular. Offense. The idea that something offends you is not an argument. It is not a defense, and it is not a shield or a protection against unpopular speech.
Louis, it's a brilliant point. I saw Ben Stein shaking his head the whole time. I'll get to you in a second, Carrie. But,
it's all good.
No, I'm shaking my head with respect and in agreement. I mean, I find people who are Holocaust deniers obviously incredibly offensive and horrible and sick, but I don't think they should be denied the right to speak. The problem is here that the people who are in a position to deny them the position to speak are not responsible to anyone. I mean, if the Congress denies them a right to speak, there can be lawsuits about it under the First Amendment, or the people who pass those laws can be removed from office at the next election. If the powers that be at the big social media companies decide these people can't talk, there's no recourse. There's nothing that can be done to stop them. Nothing at all, at least as far as I'm aware. I'm a lawyer. I don't claim to be up to date on every single thing in communications law, but I know that there's nothing preventing them from shutting me up, there's nothing preventing them from allowing the most people I hate, like Farrakhan, to speak. And there's nothing that prevents them from shutting down anyone they don't like from speaking. They operate in a world of their own with total unaccountable power. This has never happened before in America, even during the Civil War, the war between the states, more properly called. Even then, people could express views in New York, newspapers could express views sympathetic to the South. Nothing like that could possibly happen now.
I love that we're all, because I just want to say something, and I'll yield to Carrie. I love that we're all in agreement that while we might find speech so offensive, we love speech so much that we're willing to tolerate what we hate. And that really is what's the difference between us and them. I may hate what you say, but I'll protect your right to say it.
We're all ACLU liberals now. Yeah. The right has assumed the position of the ACLU. It's weird.
There's still some people like Nadine Strawson from the ACLU who is very good on free speech, and the two people I mentioned before, Harvey Silvergate and Wendy Kaminer. And just want to say one other thing. The two institutions that consistently corrupt, devalue, and abuse language are government and huge corporations. What they have in common is bigness. And it's the one instance where companies don't economize when it comes to language. They distort, they misinterpret, they misapply, they use more words rather than less. With government, government never raises taxes, it increases revenues. With corporations, you have to have what is called buy-in.
What are you thinking of when you're talking about big corporations doing this?
That businesses, they corrupt language, they abuse language.
What is an example of
that? Typical business writing, any press release.
Boom. Any press release. Good God.
But this is for a different night.
XYZ Inc. proudly announces the implementation of its breakthrough, innovative, revolutionary mobile application, Judah, the personal assistant.
And
I haven't observe that to be a big problem. I think everyone expects there to be a lot of flackery, but that seems to me, as Judah said, perhaps for another night. I think the real problem we're talking about is we're coming up upon an enormously consequential election, and we're simply not getting both sides of the story, or even close to it. Not even close to it.
And Carrie was about to.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. First, I wanted to kind of, just to kind of come back to that. We kind of went back off with the corporation thing, but somebody asked a question too, and I want to answer that question because it does kind of relate to the censorship issue. Coming from a world that's very censored, but back to the point we were making, how we all agree that, about the importance of freedom of speech. And I have this T-shirt that I wear around, particularly around election time, that says free speech is more important than your feelings. All day, every day, end of story, right? And,
oh my God, if you made that, I would buy that. Just so you know.
I didn't make it, but no, but I did just make one that says, under communism, my boobs wouldn't be this big because I'd be starving. I did just make it. I do have that, but it's one of those things where it's you can find them at wethefemale.net.
My girlfriend bought one the other day. She wanted me to thank you for that.
I'm happy to seize the means of production.
Anyways,
So my point is that it is there. Being somebody who loves to geek out about how the Constitution was written, not just what it says. There's a reason it's number one, right? That was the primary thing, and then the second, like we were talking about in some of the side chat, is that the second is there to defend the first. All day, every day. That's one of the primary reasons. Like, there's a reason that Bill of Rights are written in the order that they're written in. That's always intentional, based on priorities that these men had, and understood the significance of what they meant for citizens. So somebody asked in this, they said, Carrie, the left has made it seem like guns are bad. Seemed? Yeah, because bad people use guns and bad things. What is my opinion on the suppression of facts when it comes to gun violence in America? So this is going to lead, and the reason I wanted to read that is it leads back into kind of what I'm talking about, is that this is a much bigger issue than just, people being offended, right? This has become if you want to talk about one of their catchphrases, get it out of here. Systemic reasons is that they're teaching your children this at a young age, to believe in hate speech, to believe that people shouldn't say things because feelings are more important. And the pattern of behavior with that. And the same thing with the gun argument, right? I mean, good Lord, that's a really good point. I am an advocate and an instructor in one of the most censored industries, and the facts being manipulated and twisted. So it's an incredibly frustrating concept when I come to people and I'm trying to explain to them what things, and they just can't get it, and then they refuse. And that refusal, I'm beginning to realize, is coming from such a pattern of indoctrinated thinking that's starting with our children and progressing up. And so while we can defend, we understand this as adults, what is the solution, right? Can we get to the children in some capacity to start to change that paradigm? Now, I have a very modern thinking daughter about that. Like, she gets it. She ranted about Marxism, her Instagram being flooded with Marxism. She goes, I don't understand why the hell they think I'm a Marxist, because my daughter says there's no better FU to the government than learning how to live without them. Right. So she's like completely opposite of that. But that's what they started to try to get at her with at her age, even though there was no pattern of anything that she does on her one social media that would give them the indication of that. So it's coming from the schools, it's coming from these social media platforms, but more importantly, I think the complicit behavior of parents continuing to allow their children to, right, through either their complacent behavior, right?
Parents, their friends.
Well, friends are just, no, some of them are parents. Their parents are, if their parents had some sort of indoctrination of this kind of mindset thinking too, right? They're learning it at home, or the parents are too lazy to hold the schools accountable, and what they're learning, right? So this is something that is happening at a systemic level with our children.
What parents are going to hold the schools responsible? The parents have been brainwashed too.
Yeah.
It's a very.
I don't completely agree with you. I respectfully disagree with you, Mr. Stein. I think that it isn't just that the parents are. I do agree to a certain degree, but also it's laziness. They are too lazy to get off of their fat asses and get down there and hold these schools accountable for the behavior. I see this all the time happening all over social media because I'm on it a lot because of all this crap I do. And I'm sitting here watching in Virginia where these parents are pissed off because the school said that they had to sign a contract saying that they're not going to watch what their kids are doing in class. And they're signing the paper and then bitching, about it on the internet. And I'm thinking, what are you bitching about? You put these people in these jobs, right? You literally hold the power to get rid of these people, yet you're sitting and complaining about it on, ironically, a very platform that is doing exactly what you're pissed about, which is being censored.
And that really is the irony in all of this. We are running out of time, so I want to ask everybody one simple question as we're running out of time. And I want to start with Lewis. Just briefly, if you could just say, what is one thing that you think we could do? As Ben said, this is truly one of the most important elections of our lifetime, as far as many things go. What could we personally do to end this assault on free speech, Lewis?
I don't think we're going to end it, but
or to start the fight back.
Learn about the history of the United States, starting with the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and here's a good word, seminal court decisions. And all of that is a preamble to my real question. Carrie, cosplay, yay or nay?
I don't know. It depends on if you sign the release form and how much you're willing to pay.
but Lewis, getting back to it. So that's actually, Lewis, that was a very good point, ruined by a joke that most people won't get. Ben Boychuk. Ben Boychuk, what about you? What do you think is one thing you can do personally?
Get off of the bad social media platforms as quickly as you possibly can. Get onto Parler, and I'm not shilling for Parler.
I'll send you your check later.
Yeah,
you don't have to wait.
Remzo's job. That's Remzo's job. But Parler is the toehold right now, I think. But get off of Facebook if you can. Get off of Twitter if you can. The other thing you should do, by the way, remember how it used to be before we were connected. Renew friendships. Maybe even write letters by hand. The point is, we have gotten used to social media as a way of it. It's very hard to be friends with people. It takes work. Social media made it easy. Let's make that hard again. Let's make it difficult. Let's put in the effort to renew relationships that we used to have offline. Let's do that. And if we can do that, then maybe we can, restore some lost social capital, and maybe we can begin to restore something approximating, community and the things that really did make America great.
That was absolutely beautiful. If Remzo or Kerry thinks they could top that, or just give a brief thing of, it was beautiful, Ben.
It really was.
Yes. I say we close with Mr. Stein because
if I could add one thing.
Yeah, go for it, Remzo.
I'll be 30 seconds. February 2015. It was my second semester of my first year at undergrad at Liberty University. I chose to go to Liberty University because I wanted a school that matched my values. And here I am sitting in class in Dr. DeWitt's creation science course. We're getting ready for midterms, and he says we're going to watch one of the most talked about documentaries in the country that most professors will never show in a classroom. And it was Expelled by Ben Stein. And we watched that during 2 courses. And I learned more from that documentary and more from that course and more than my time at school than I did anywhere else being indoctrinated by liberal propaganda. I went there because I wanted a program, I wanted a school that matched my values and would set me up for success. The biggest power is within us. Divest your time and your money and you can change the world.
Thank you. What about you, Carrie, before we get to Ben?
Ben Jr. over there, he said it best. It's about developing those relationships. If you really want to create change, you need to do it in your home, and you need to start taking if you're a parent, you need to start taking more responsibility and being more active with what your children are doing. and being at the end of the day, right? Because it's easy for all of us to get into echo chambers, including conservative leaning. I'm I'm a hardline constitutionalist. I'm not a big party person at all. And so it's easy to watch both sides of this argument. And I would say, get comfortable being uncomfortable. Listen to what somebody else has to say. I get that it's harder for one side than the other. I believe me, I get it. But be a resource and not an adversary, right? When you get into that engagement, let them ask. When you start to feel them resist, back off. I do this with the gun rights thing all the time. Back off. You know what? If you do it, they'll come back, and then they'll come back.
That's a great
point,
they'll come back. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ben, final thought on that?
I think it's all of these thoughts have been great, and I think my fellow Ben had a very good point. We should form our own networks. I know here in California, the Bolshevist governor has banned meetings of religious groups, and if I may say so, I have a fairly comfortable house so far. I won't have it for much longer, I guess. And so I have the meetings at my house, and we're like an underground cell of people who still believe in God, and we are happy to have our meetings.
And that's all the time we have for this edition of The World According to Ben Stein. Thank you again, Ben Boychuk of American Greatness. Where can people find you, Ben?
Well, please go to www.amgreatness.com. And of course, you can find me on Parler at bboychuk3. That's BBOYCHUK3. Find me on Parler, follow me, and good things might happen. Maybe.
And I just want to say, I know we're ending, but the funniest thing is Ben Boychuk could have had the name Ben Boychuk, but he's been so indoctrinated by being on Facebook and Twitter for so long that he kept the same screen name instead of taking his own. Yes, go. Your mic is off.
You're talking to me?
It has to do with I'm honoring my father, and I'm ceding ground to my son, who is Benjamin Boychuk IV.
Oh, that's actually really cool. Thank you. And Remso, thank you as always. How can people follow you?
At Remso, RAMSO on Parler.
Lewis is building up his Parler account. You could find them right at Elfine, Lewis.
Correct. FEIN.
And Lewis is actually just one of the greatest, smartest geniuses you will ever find in this country. Ben Stein, just absolute genius. And of course, thank you, Carrie Sloan, for taking the time for being with us. Sorry for what Lewis was thinking, and remind people where they could find you.
Carrie.
That's okay. I know how to deal with him. Yes, sir. What were you going to say to me?
Where could people find you?
Where can we find you?
Oh, you can find me. The easiest way to find me across most all platforms is stilettos and shotguns. And you can find me at that on Parler. You can find me that on Facebook and on Instagram, which is where I'm most active.
And I just want to tell everybody, thank you so much, Carrie. And I want to tell everybody this coming Friday night, we're going to be doing the show a little bit earlier. We're going to be doing it at 6 p.m. Pacific time. It's going to be a Friday sort of free for all. And the topic will be, who has Ben Stein not met? And that'll be it is a game we play as we drive down to the desert. I've rarely been, it's a fascinating game of who Ben Stein hasn't met. And remember to follow us at The World According to Ben Stein on Parler, and of course at Ben Stein on Parler. Like us on Facebook at The World According to Ben Stein, and subscribe to the YouTube channel at The World According to Ben Stein. I'm Judah Friedman, and I will see you next time, Ben.
God bless you, sir.
God bless you all. Thank you.